Where are you?
You know how everyone talks about the old library on campus, the one that's always deserted after dark, with those ancient creaky wooden floors and dusty old books? Yeah, that's where this all happened. We were a group of 5, cramming for finals in what was supposed to be the quietest spot on campus. And quiet it was, almost too quiet. It started off normally enough. We spread out our textbooks and notes, taking over one of the long tables in the center of the library. The place was practically ours alone, except for the occasional shuffle of the librarian in the distance. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, and the dim light from the ancient chandeliers barely cut through the darkness. It was the perfect setting for an all-nighter, or so we thought. The first sign that something off came around midnight. I was deep into my chemistry notes when I heard a faint thud. I looked up, expecting to see one of my friends knocking over a book, but everyone was still in their seats, focused on their work. Shrugging it off, I went back to my notes. But then, the thuds kept coming, soft, rhythmic, like footsteps, but in a place where no one else should have been. I caught Tyler's eye, and he looked as confused as I felt. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He nodded, glancing around nervously. "Probably just the building settling," he muttered. But I could tell he didn't believe it any more than I did. A few minutes later, the lights flickered, just once, but long enough to make everyone freeze. I glanced at the old, barred windows, wondering if a storm was coming. But the sky outside was clear, pitch black, but no sign of bad weather. That's when Sarah, who was sitting across from me, let out a small gasp. "Guys, look," she whispered, pointing to the shelves behind us. We all turned to see what she was talking about. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual, just rows of books, old and untouched. But then I saw it. One of the books slowly sliding out of the shelf, as if someone or something was pulling it out. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but I forced a laugh. "Okay, who's messing with us?" I said, trying to keep things light. But no one was laughing. The book slid all the way out and fell to the floor with a dull thud. We all just stared at it, none of us moving. "All right, this is getting weird," Emily said, her voice shaky. "Maybe we should take a break, go grab some coffee or something." "Yeah, good idea," Tyler agreed, already standing up. But just as we were about to gather our things, we heard it. Whispers. Soft, indistinct, coming from somewhere deep in the library. My heart started pounding. We all stood there, frozen, straining to hear what the voices were saying, but they were too faint, too garbled. It was like they were coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Let's go," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. We hurriedly packed up our stuff, not even bothering to be neat about it. But as we turned to leave, the lights flickered again, this time going completely out for a full 5 seconds before coming back on. In that brief darkness, I swear I felt something cold brush past me like a breath of icy air. When the lights flickered back on, I saw that one of us was missing. "Where's Jake?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. We all looked around, but he was gone. His books were still on the table, his jacket draped over the back of the chair, but Jake was nowhere to be seen. We called out his name, our voices echoing in the vast, empty space, but there was no answer. Just more of those whispers, growing louder now, more insistent. My chest tightened with fear. This wasn't just some prank or old building noises. Something was seriously wrong. "We have to find him," Tyler said, grabbing his phone for light. We spread out, moving through the aisles of books, calling Jake's name. The library felt like a labyrinth, the rows of shelves stretching on forever, each one darker and more ominous than the last. As I turned a corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the middle of the aisle, was Jake's phone, the screen cracked and smeared with something dark. I reached down to pick it up, my hands shaking. When I flipped it over, the screen lit up with a message, one that hadn't been there before. "Help me." I staggered back, nearly dropping the phone. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but there was no time. The whispers were louder now, almost like a chant, filling the air with a suffocating pressure. I felt something pulling at me, urging me to follow deeper into the darkness. "Jake!" I yelled, my voice cracking. But all I got in return was silence, followed by a cold, cruel laugh that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. That's when I saw it. Movement at the far end of the aisle. A shadow, darker than the rest, gliding silently toward me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The shadow took shape, forming into the outline of a person. A woman dressed in tattered clothes, her hair hanging in a matted mess over her face. Her eyes, hollow and black, locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of pure terror wash over me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She raised a hand, pointing directly at me, and I felt an invisible force slam into my chest, knocking the wind out of me. I fell to the ground, gasping for air, the phone slipping from my grasp. The whispers turned into screams, filling my head with noise, with pain. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would all just stop, but it didn't. It only got worse, the cold creeping into my bones, paralyzing me with fear. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The screams, the cold, the pressure, all gone. I opened my eyes, expecting to see that horrifying figure standing over me, but she was gone. The aisle was empty, save for the fallen books and Jake's phone. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the phone and running back to the others. They were huddled together, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave, now!" I shouted, not caring how desperate I sounded. They didn't argue. We bolted for the exit, not daring to look back. As we burst out of the library into the cold night air, I felt the weight lift from my chest. But the fear, the dread, it lingered. We never found Jake. The police searched the entire campus, but there was no trace of him. Just his phone with that single message, and the whispers that still haunt me every time I close my eyes. And that library? It's still there, still waiting for the next group of students to wander in, thinking they're just there to study. But I know better. I know what's really waiting for them in those shadows. Moving into my new dorm was supposed to be exciting. It was my first time living away from home, and I was eager to start this new chapter. My roommate, Lily, seemed nice enough quiet, a bit reserved, but friendly. We didn't talk much at first, just exchanged a few pleasantries as we unpacked our things. The first few days went by uneventfully. We settled into a routine, classes during the day, studying or hanging out in the evenings. But then things started getting strange. It began with little things. I'd come back to the room and find Lily gone, even though she had told me she'd be around. I'd hear the door creak open late at night, and when I'd look over, I'd see her slipping out, not saying a word. I figured she was just one of those night owls who like to go for walks to clear her head. But the more it happened, the more uneasy I became. One night, I decided to ask her about it. We were both sitting in our room, the only light coming from the small desk lamp between our beds. I tried to be casual about it. "Hey, Lily, where do you go at night? I've noticed you leaving the room pretty late." She looked at me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, a small, sad smile. "Just out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That was it. No explanation, no details, just out. I wanted to press her, but something in her tone made me hold back. Instead, I just nodded and let it go, though the unease in my chest grew. The next night, I decided to stay up and see where she went. I pretended to fall asleep, but kept one eye slightly open, watching her. Sure enough, around midnight, she got up, slipped on her shoes, and quietly opened the door. I waited a few seconds before getting up to follow her. The hallway was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering slightly. I could see Lily's figure moving silently down the hall, her steps almost too light to hear. I kept my distance, not wanting her to know I was following. She walked down the stairs, past the common room, and out into the courtyard. As I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me, making me shiver. Lily was heading toward the old part of campus where the older buildings stood, half forgotten and mostly unused. My heart pounded as I followed her, the silence of the night amplifying every little sound. She stopped in front of one of the old buildings, a place I'd never seen anyone enter. The windows were dark, and the place looked like it hadn't been maintained in years.
Lily stood there for a moment just staring at the entrance before pushing the heavy door open and stepping inside. I hesitated. Something about that building felt wrong, like it was holding secrets it didn't want to share. But I couldn't just leave her there. Gathering my courage, I walked up to the door and slipped inside after her. The inside of the building was just as eerie as the outside, dusty, dark, and filled with the faint scent of mildew. I could hear Lily's footsteps echoing down the hallway, so I followed, keeping my steps as quiet as possible. She led me to a room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and I peeked inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The room was filled with old, broken furniture, and in the middle of it all was a circle of candles, their flames flickering weakly. Lily was standing in the center, her back to me, staring at something on the floor. I couldn't see what it was, but I could hear her mumbling something, words that sounded like a prayer or a chant. I wanted to call out to her, to tell her to stop, but the words stuck in my throat. I watched in frozen horror as she knelt down, her hands trembling as she reached out toward the object on the floor. Suddenly she turned around and her eyes locked onto mine. They were wide and filled with fear, but also something else, resignation. She knew I had followed her, and she didn't seem surprised. Instead, she just shook her head slowly as if telling me to leave, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my mind racing with questions and fear. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. "It's not safe." "Lily, what are you doing?" I finally managed to ask, my voice shaking. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned back to the object on the floor, a small, old-fashioned mirror, its surface cracked and dirty. She picked it up, and as she did, the candle flames flickered violently, almost going out. I felt a sudden rush of cold air, like something had swept through the room. "I have to go," Lily said, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry." Before I could react, she stood up, holding the mirror close to her chest, and walked toward the door. As she passed me, I reached out to stop her, but my hand went right through her arm, like she wasn't even there. I gasped and stumbled back, my mind reeling with the impossibility of what had just happened. Lily didn't look back. She walked out of the room and down the hallway, her figure growing fainter with each step, until she disappeared completely. I ran after her, but when I reached the hallway, it was empty. No sign of her, no footsteps, nothing. I searched the entire building, my heart pounding in my chest, but she was gone. It was like she had vanished into thin air. I don't know how long I stayed in that building, searching and calling her name, but eventually I had to accept the truth. Lily was gone, and I had no idea where she had gone or if she was ever coming back. The next day, I went to the dorm manager and told him what had happened. He looked at me like I was crazy, but then he pulled out a file and flipped through it. After a few minutes, he showed me a photo of Lily. But it wasn't the Lily I knew. This photo was old, faded, and Lily looked different, like she had in the beginning, but younger and somehow less alive. "This girl?" he said, his voice low. "She disappeared from this dorm 5 years ago. We never found her, but every year someone claims to see her again, just like you did." I stared at the photo, my mind spinning. I wanted to believe it was all some kind of sick joke, but I knew it wasn't. I had seen her, talked to her, followed her, and now she was gone. I moved out of that dorm the next day. I couldn't stay there, not with the memories and the fear. But even now, I can't escape it. I see her in my dreams, always just out of reach, always holding that broken mirror. And I know deep down that she's still out there, waiting for someone else to follow her into the darkness. I've always been drawn to places most people avoid. Old buildings, forgotten hallways, and dusty rooms. There's something about them that feels alive, like they're holding secrets just waiting to be uncovered. So when my friends and I stumbled upon that old science lab in the university's basement, I should have known better. But curiosity got the best of us, and now I wish we'd never found it. It all started when we were exploring the campus late one night. We were supposed to be studying, but you know how it is, anything to procrastinate. The basement was supposed to be off limits, but the door was unlocked, and we figured, why not? It wasn't like anyone was going to be down there. The place was a maze of narrow hallways and storage rooms filled with old equipment. We wandered around for a while, joking about finding some long-lost treasure or hidden stash of exam answers. But then, we found something much more interesting. At the end of a particularly dark hallway, there was a door that looked different from the rest. It was heavy, metal, with a faded sign that read, "Experimental Laboratory, Restricted Access." Of course, that only made us more eager to see what was inside. When we pushed the door open, the first thing that hit us was the smell. Stale, musty air, like the room hadn't been touched in years. The lab was a mess, with old equipment scattered around and papers strewn across the floor. It was like everyone had just up and left in the middle of something and no one had been back since. "Whoa, this place is creepy," Sarah said, her voice echoing off the walls. "What do you think they were doing down here?" We started poking around, sifting through the papers and examining the strange devices left behind. Most of it didn't make any sense to us. Formulas, charts, weird diagrams. But then Tyler found a notebook half buried under a pile of dusty files. He flipped through it, his brow furrowing as he read. "Guys, check this out," he said, holding up the notebook. "This is some kind of research journal. It talks about an experiment they were working on. A way to connect with parallel dimensions." "Parallel dimensions?" I repeated, half skeptical, half intrigued. It sounded like something out of a sci-fi movie, not real life. "Yeah, listen to this," Tyler continued, reading aloud. "They were trying to open a portal using some kind of electromagnetic field to tear a hole between our world and another. But it says here they shut the experiment down because something went wrong." "What went wrong?" Emily asked, leaning in closer. Tyler skimmed the next few pages, his expression growing more serious. "It doesn't say, just that the project was terminated and the lab was sealed off." I don't know why, but something about that last part sent a chill down my spine. "Maybe we should leave this alone," I said, trying to sound casual, even though my gut was telling me to get out of there. But Tyler wasn't listening. He had that look in his eyes, the one that always got us into trouble. "Come on, guys," he said, grinning. "A portal to another dimension? We have to try this." "I don't know, man," Jake muttered, glancing around the room. "What if it's dangerous? There's a reason they shut this place down." "Exactly," Sarah agreed, crossing her arms. "This feels like a bad idea." But Tyler was already tinkering with the equipment, his curiosity overpowering any sense of caution. "Just a quick test," he insisted. "We'll set it up, see what happens, and if it looks sketchy, we shut it down. No harm, no foul." Reluctantly, we agreed. I wish we hadn't. We spent the next hour piecing together the old equipment, following the notes in the journal as best we could. There was a strange energy in the room, like the air was charged with electricity, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But I pushed the unease aside, telling myself it was just nerves. Finally, Tyler flipped the switch, and the machines hummed to life. At first, nothing happened. We stood there, watching the monitors and waiting for... well, we didn't know what. But then the lights flickered, and a low, rumbling sound filled the room. "Is that supposed to happen?" Emily asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "I'm not sure," Tyler admitted, his eyes fixed on the screen. The rumbling grew louder and the air around us seemed to warp, like heat waves distorting the space. Then, in the center of the room, a faint shimmer appeared. Barely visible at first, but growing stronger with each passing second. "Holy crap," Jake whispered. "Is that..." "A portal," Tyler breathed, his voice filled with awe. "We actually did it." But as the portal grew, so did the sense of wrongness. The shimmering light took on an eerie, unnatural glow, and the rumbling turned into a deafening roar. The room shook, and I could feel the floor vibrating beneath my feet. "We need to shut it down!" I yelled over the noise, but Tyler seemed transfixed, unable or unwilling to move. That's when everything went to hell. The portal surged, and suddenly the room was plunged into darkness. The lights flickered back on, but they were dim, barely illuminating the chaos around us. Equipment sparked and hissed, sending out bursts of static, and the portal, no longer a shimmering light but a gaping black void, began to pull everything toward it. I grabbed onto a table, trying to keep myself from being sucked in. "Tyler, shut it down!" I screamed, but he was gone. Not gone as in pulled into the portal, just gone, like he'd vanished into thin air. Panic set in. Emily was holding onto a chair, her eyes wide with terror, while Jake was frantically trying to reach the controls. But the pull of the portal was too strong, and I could feel myself slipping, losing my grip. Then, as suddenly as it started, the portal shrank and the pull stopped. The lights came back on fully and the room fell silent save for our ragged breathing. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm here," Jake answered, pulling himself up from the floor. "Emily?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Where's Tyler?" We looked around, but there was no sign of him. It was like he had never been there. But I knew what I had seen. One moment he was standing by the portal, and the next he was gone, swallowed by that darkness. We searched the lab calling his name, but deep down I knew it was pointless. He wasn't in the room anymore, wasn't in our world anymore. We fled the lab, leaving the equipment and the cursed portal behind. No one spoke as we raced back to our dorms, our minds too filled with terror and disbelief to form words. I don't know where Tyler went, or if he's even still alive. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear a faint hum like the machines in that lab, and I'll see a shimmer out of the corner of my eye. And I know, in my gut, that whatever we unleashed that night isn't done with us. I just hope it never finds its way back. When I first got accepted into the sorority, I thought it was going to be the best part of my college experience. The house was beautiful, an old Victorian-style mansion on the edge of campus with ivy crawling up the walls and a sprawling garden that looked straight out of a fairy tale. But beneath that picturesque exterior, there was something dark, something wrong, and I didn't realize it until it was too late. The first night I moved in, everything seemed normal. The other girls were friendly, the rooms were cozy, and we spent the evening laughing and getting to know each other. But as I was unpacking, one of the older sisters, Jessica, pulled me aside. "Listen," she said, her voice low and serious. "There's something you need to know about this house." I frowned, taken aback by her tone. "What do you mean?" She glanced around, as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. "There's a history here. Every year during initiation week, something happens, something bad. And it always starts the same way, with strange dreams and shadows in the corners of your room. Just be careful, okay?" I laughed it off, thinking she was just trying to scare the new girl, but her expression was dead serious and it left a chill in my bones that I couldn't shake. Still, I pushed it to the back of my mind. It was probably just an old sorority hazing tradition, right? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you, making every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the wind outside sound ominous. Eventually, I drifted off, but it wasn't long before I was jolted awake by a loud thud. I sat up, my heart racing, and looked around the room. The moonlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting strange shadows on the walls. For a moment, I thought I saw something move in the corner, a dark shape hunched over watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself, trying to steady my breathing. But the next morning, I found something strange. The mirror on my dresser was cracked, a jagged line running from corner to corner. I didn't remember breaking it, and it hadn't been like that when I went to bed. I asked the other girls if they'd heard anything during the night, but they all shook their heads looking at me like I was imagining things. Over the next few days, things only got worse. The strange dreams Jessica had warned me about started, vivid, terrifying nightmares of a woman in white, her face hidden behind a veil standing at the foot of my bed. She didn't speak, didn't move, just watched me with hollow, empty eyes. I'd wake up drenched in sweat. The image of her burned into my mind. I started seeing her when I was awake too, always in the corners of rooms or reflected in mirrors just for a split second before she vanished. The other girls noticed something was off too. We'd hear footsteps in the hallways when no one was there, doors creaking open on their own, and the air would grow cold, almost freezing in the middle of the night. Jessica's warning kept replaying in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all being watched. I finally decided to confront her, to ask her what was really going on. "Jessica, what's happening in this house?" I demanded one evening, after yet another restless night. She hesitated, her eyes filled with something I hadn't noticed before: fear. "It's the curse," she said quietly. "It started years ago, when one of the founding sisters, a girl named Evelyn, was rejected during initiation. She was so devastated she took her own life. Ever since then, her spirit haunts this house, and every year during initiation she claims another sister." My blood ran cold. "Claims them? What do you mean?" "Every year one of us disappears," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one knows where they go or what happens to them, but they're never seen again." I stared at her, my mind racing. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Would you have believed me?" she asked, and I had to admit she was right. If she told me this on the first day, I would have laughed it off as a ghost story. But now, after everything I'd seen, I couldn't deny that something was terribly wrong. "We have to stop this," I said, determination replacing my fear. "We have to find a way to break the curse." Jessica looked at me with a sad smile. "Many have tried. No one has succeeded." But I wasn't ready to give up. I spent the next few days researching Evelyn's story, digging through old records and talking to alumni who had lived in the house years before. The more I learned, the more desperate I became. Evelyn had been a real person, and her death had been as tragic as Jessica had said. But there were no records of what happened after, no hints about how to appease her spirit or break the curse. The final night of initiation week came, and the tension in the house was palpable. Everyone was on edge, jumping at every little sound. We all knew what was coming, even if we didn't want to admit it. That night, the dreams were worse than ever. I saw Evelyn again, but this time, she wasn't at the foot of my bed. She was right next to me, her cold breath on my face, whispering my name. I woke up with a start, gasping for air, and for a moment, I thought I saw her standing at the door, watching me with those hollow eyes. I knew then that it was my turn. The curse had chosen me. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run, to leave the house and never look back, but I couldn't just abandon the other girls. They were my friends, and if I didn't stop this, one of them would be next. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went to the attic, where Evelyn's old things were stored. It was a place none of us ever went, too dusty and full of bad memories. But I had a feeling that if there was any way to end this, it would be there. The attic was dark and musty, filled with old trunks and forgotten memorabilia. I searched through them, my heart pounding, until I found what I was looking for: a diary hidden at the bottom of a trunk with Evelyn's name scrawled on the cover. I opened it with trembling hands, reading through her final entries. They were filled with anger, bitterness, and despair, her words growing more desperate as she realized she was being pushed out, rejected by the very sisters she had wanted so badly to belong to. And then, at the very end, there was a single sentence that made my blood run cold. "I will make them remember me." I knew what I had to do. I took the diary and went back to my room, where I found the other girls waiting, their faces pale and fearful. "Jessica, we need to gather everyone," I said, my voice shaking. "I think I know how to end this." We gathered in the main hall, the diary in my hands. I read aloud Evelyn's final words, her pain and anger echoing through the room. When I was done, I placed the diary on the floor and lit a match, setting it ablaze. For a moment, nothing happened, then the flames roared to life, engulfing the diary in a blinding light. The house shook, and I felt a cold wind rush through the room, carrying with it a whisper, Evelyn's whisper. But instead of anger, there was something else in her voice now. Relief, maybe even peace. And just like that, it was over. The wind died down, the flames flickered out, and the house fell silent. The next morning, the air felt lighter, and the shadows that had once seemed so menacing were gone. We all knew, without needing to say it, that the curse had been lifted. But I'll never forget those nights or the look in Evelyn's eyes, and I'll always wonder, what would have happened if we hadn't stopped her? If we had just let the curse continue, year after year? Maybe it's best not to think about it.